Well, you don't have to be a fan of Game of Thrones to know that winter is indeed coming, and with it, the winter weather, and with some advice for pet owners to make their way through the season. Veterinarian Marty Hobson is back with us. Another edition of Pets and People here on Island Morning. Welcome back, Marty.
Thanks, Matt.
And you are not alone. You've brought my buddy back in here, Jake.
Yes, Jake, who's almost 15.
Oh, my gosh. He wears it well. He is aging gracefully. So I know we've talked about holiday hazards in the past, right? And, some hazards to avoid through the Christmas season?
Yes, we have. It was a couple of years ago, though, but we never really did have a chance to talk about just general cold weather woes. And it might seem like the snow and the ice isn't here yet, but as you said, winter is coming.
So what concerns do pet owners have to have? I mean, these guys have their fur coats. I've got a golden retriever at home. He looks pretty warm most of the time.
Right, but in some cases, it's not that much insulation. So think about those short-haired dogs. That's kind of akin to wearing a T-shirt when you go out and it's below freezing. So you might be able to make it as far as the side of your house to the green bin to put out the compost, but you're not going to be staying out for too long. Now, I do want to say there are dogs that might spend a lot of time outside or are certain breeds and are more acclimatized. But as a general rule, if it's too cold for you, it's too cold for your pet. And also in wet weather, fur loses some of its insulating capacity. So a colder, rainier day might actually be more of a danger than you might think. But no matter what, we will definitely be having some weather where dogs and cats can't stay outside for too long, at least not without adequate shelter.
And so what can we do to help them out, apart from the shelter? Because I've seen the coats and the sweaters and the booties for animals. Do you recommend those?
Yeah, they can be a good idea, especially for those short-haired dogs that I mentioned or dogs that get groomed. Of course, you can always ask your groomer for a slightly longer cut to give a little more insulation. But if you are using those sweaters or jackets, you still can't just, maybe I do this too often with my kids, put them into the snowsuit and shove them out the door. But with our dogs, these should be used under supervision. Don't count on those accessories to keep them warm for long periods of time. And plus, their legs and neck can get caught, maybe on a branch, or they end up with one leg through the head hole and are limping around. So these are really meant to be used under supervision. These booties that we see, they're sort of a newer thing in the last 10 to 15 years. And that can be useful for another issue that dogs face, and that's irritation from salt and other ice melting products.
Right.
Yeah, those products can be a little bit caustic to the dog's feet. So the protective booties can help with cold or with these chemicals or salts that are used. There's even products that you can get. One is called Pad Tough, and these are either liquids or almost like a waxy chapstick that you can rub onto the dog's pads to help protect them. And also, it's really important to note that some of those ice melting products can be toxic to pets. So if you're using one or you think that your neighbor is, it's nice to make sure that it does state on the packaging that it's safe to use around animals. And I should also mention antifreeze. It's a very sweet tasting liquid, and even a couple of licks from a drip from a car can cause death in dogs and cats. It's very toxic to the animal's kidneys.
If it is cold enough outside, can an animal actually get frostbite?
Yes, and we think of this happening a lot in cats. So cats that live outside or indoor-outdoor cats, it's the tips of the ears that are most affected. So the blood vessels, you feel this in your fingers and toes too, they kind of constrict in order to direct our blood towards the internal areas to keep them nice and warm, to conserve heat. So if the extremities like the ears or the tail are exposed to cold enough temperatures for a long enough time, the tissue gets damaged. And you won't see anything right away, but maybe some redness and heat after a day or two. And if it's advanced enough, you'll see the ear tips start to shrivel and they may blacken and fall off. And we've probably all seen those cats with those sort of cauliflower type ears where they've lost a bit of it due to frostbite.
You mentioned adequate shelter. What about that? Especially for people who might have animals that spend a lot of time outdoors. What would you recommend?
Well, an adequate shelter is actually required by law. That's in our Animal Welfare Act, as well as a water source. So a good quality dog house or access to like an indoor-outdoor run where maybe the dog is going into the garage or a sheltered area for part of the time. But some animals are stray or living outdoors all the time, and they may try and find shelter, for example, under your car hood, getting that warmth from an engine that's just been turned off. So a handy trick is to always bang on the hood of your car or honk your horn before you start it up. People may not know about this, but cats or wildlife can get caught in the fan belt, and that would cause catastrophic injury, as you can imagine. And if you do have feral cats in your area and you're worried about a cold weather, there's some really cool designs for shelters. One simple one is 2 Rubbermaid bins, if you can picture that, a smaller one and a larger one, and you cut a hole in each, line them up so that's your door, and then you put insulation in between the two of them. and then line that with straw or some kind of bedding.
You mentioned banging on the hood of that car, and once you're in the car, we talk a lot about this in the summertime, about the need to make sure windows are open, there's ventilation because of overheated animals in the car. Similar concerns in winter for the cold temperatures?
Mm-hmm. We are really strict in the summer, aren't we? And sort of the rule is just don't have your dog in the car at all. Even if you think it's going to be ventilated enough, they can get heat stroke more easily than you would think. But on a very cold day, a dog left in a car can be in danger too. They are out of the wind, and it does provide some shelter, but try not to leave them unattended for any length of time.
What about slips and falls? You know, it can get pretty icy out there. You take the dog out for a walk. You might be slipping and sliding, but the pet might be too.
It's true. They can damage their cruciate ligaments in their knees or even dislocate their hips. Some thoughts would be to keep them on a leash so they're more under control, but if the ground is really slippery, they could also pull you off your balance, so you don't want to get hurt either. And another thing that kind of ties in with this is that dogs can easily fall through ice into water bodies like the ocean, river, ponds. So it might look frozen enough, but your dog isn't going to know. And we've all seen those heart-wrenching videos on Facebook where a dog has fallen through and someone goes to rescue them. But that is quite dangerous. So the going advice is that, it's just too much of a risk and we might end up with a human tragedy as well as a canine one. So unless you're having professional help, don't go in after your animal if they've fallen through the ice.
So when you're weighing all of these various risks, is it really good advice to just keep pets indoors as much as you can through the winter season?
A lot of times we do see animals spending more times indoors, but I wanted to bring up a couple of indoor hazards as well. People might be using a space heater or using their wood stove, and your pet might not realize how hot it is, just like a small child. They could end up getting burned or could knock over a space heater and cause a fire in your home. Carbon monoxide, if we hear a lot of tragic stories with people in small spaces that end up having toxicity from that. So it's great to have a monitor in your home. And people with forced air heat may also notice, just like the human inhabitants of the house, that their pets start to have dry, itchy skin just because of the increased dust movement and that dry heat from spending time inside.
And the thing is, if you're spending time indoors, we have to remind ourselves of this as people sometimes, but to get out, stay active is really important.
Mm-hmm. We do find in winter that dogs are usually not as active, especially older animals that you may notice are suffering more from arthritis and other issues like that, and that may get worse in cold weather. So a lot of the sources I was looking at to research for this segment talked about actually feeding more food to your dog just to have those calories to stay warm in the cold weather. But I think unless you're an elite athlete dog or on a sled team, most dogs I know, most of those couch potatoes, Matt, are going to be packing on the pounds. So just use a little bit of common sense and maybe be feeding a little less and monitoring that weight.
And good excuse, too, for the pet owners to get out and get that fresh air and exercise, too.
Very true, very true.
We all need it, Marty. Look, happy holidays to you. Thanks so much for stopping by, to you and Jake.
Thanks, Matt.